The airport was buzzing with movement. Announcements echoed overhead, luggage wheels clattered against the floor, and hurried travelers weaved through the crowd. But Sophie Bennett barely noticed any of it. Her older brother was finally coming home after months away, and her heart thrummed with excitement as she scanned the crowd. Then, there, a tall figure, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, standing near the arrival's gate. That's him. Without hesitation, Sophie launched herself forward, dodging through the sea of people until she reached him. Relief and joy flooded her chest as she threw her arms around him, hugging him tight. "Oh my God, I missed you so much." For a brief second, everything felt perfectly right. And then, it didn't. Something was off. Instead of a familiar embrace, her arms met unmoving steel-like muscle. Firm, unyielding. The fabric under her fingertips was wrong too. Smooth, crisp, expensive. Her brother never wore suits like this. And then there was the scent, not the casual, sporty fragrance she associated with him, but something darker, richer, intoxicatingly sophisticated. A slow, creeping realization hit her like a freight train. This was not her brother. Panic surged through her. She yanked herself back, looking up, and her stomach dropped. The man standing before her was a complete stranger. Not just any stranger, a man so effortlessly stunning, he could have walked straight off the cover of a luxury magazine. Sharp cheekbones, chiseled jaw, dark hair styled with just the right amount of carelessness, and his eyes, a piercing, stormy gray, locked onto her with a mixture of surprise and undeniable amusement. The world around her blurred into static noise. For exactly half a second, neither of them moved. Then, oh my God, Sophie stumbled backward, so fast she nearly collided with a passing suitcase. Wait, no, I didn't mean to. I meant to, but not, ugh. She threw up her hands in horror. I hugged the wrong person. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. The man didn't even flinch. He simply stood there, one eyebrow slightly raised, watching her with a look that screamed entertained curiosity. Well, he mused, adjusting the cuff of his impeccably tailored suit. That was unexpected. Sophie wanted to evaporate into thin air. I thought you were my brother, she blurted, frantically gesturing at nothing in particular. He's tall. He has dark hair. I only saw the back of your head and the reflection in the glass. It was misleading, okay? The corner of his mouth tugged upward, just slightly. A case of mistaken identity, then? He drawled. More like a case of catastrophic embarrassment, she muttered under her breath. Before he could respond, a towering security guard materialized beside him. A literal wall of muscle, dressed in black, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Sinclair, is everything all right?" the guard asked, voice steady but laced with authority. Wait, Sinclair? A warning bell went off in her brain. Damien Sinclair. The billionaire investor, the reclusive financial mogul. A man known for avoiding the spotlight at all costs. And she had just thrown herself at him. Her horrified whisper slipped out before she could stop it. Oh no. Damien seemed to catch her realization, because to her absolute dismay he smiled. A full, slow, maddeningly confident smile. "You look nervous," he observed, arms crossing as he studied her with quiet amusement. "Are you afraid of billionaires?" Sophie blinked. "I'm afraid of making a total fool of myself on airport security footage." Judging by the glint in his eyes, she had a sinking feeling. This moment wasn't one he'd be forgetting anytime soon. And neither would she. Ending up on the internet would be a nightmare. Sophie muttered the words under her breath, still reeling from the disaster she had just created. Around her, travelers rushed past, oblivious to her public humiliation. "I need to find my brother." She swallowed hard, "and maybe change my identity and move to Alaska." Damien Sinclair let out a low chuckle but said nothing. Instead, he simply watched her, his storm-gray eyes unreadable as she tried and failed to make a quick exit. Even as she disappeared into the crowd, she could feel his gaze lingering on her. And the truth was, he wasn't quite ready to let her disappear just yet. Later that evening, Sophie was back at work behind the counter of the airport cafe, adjusting a stack of glasses when an impatient customer cleared his throat. "Excuse me, I asked for a cappuccino with no foam." "This has foam." Sophie clenched her jaw. "Another one." "Of course. Sorry about that." She forced a professional smile, took the cup, and remade the drink, handing it back to the man, who took it without so much as a thank you. Just another normal shift. Working at an airport cafe meant dealing with impatient, demanding travelers, most of whom were either in a hurry or too self-important to acknowledge her existence. But she needed this job. It paid the bills and, more importantly, helped support her younger brother. She sighed, ignoring the ache in her feet. Just a few more hours until my shift ends. Across the counter, her manager, Mr. Phillips, called out, "Sophie, special order for table 12. She wiped her hands on her apron, grabbed the tray, and maneuvered through the crowded cafe, dodging travelers as she made her way to the table. But when she reached table 12, she came to a screeching halt. The tray nearly slipped from her hands. No way. Sitting right there, looking completely at ease, was Damien Sinclair, the very man she had accidentally hugged at the airport. He lounged in his seat, one arm resting on the back of the chair, a subtle smirk playing at his lips. His sharp gray eyes locked onto hers, brimming with pure amusement. Sophie's brain short-circuited. "You," she blurted out. Damien's smirk widened. "Me." He leaned forward slightly, intertwining his fingers on the table. "And it looks like this time, you're serving me. Funny how things work out, isn't it?" Sophie's cheeks burned. "This cannot be happening. I swear this isn't stalking," she mumbled, setting his drink down with slightly more force than necessary. Damien laughed, the sound low and undeniably amused. "If it were, I wouldn't mind." Sophie froze. "Wait, what?" Her grip on the tray faltered for a split second before she quickly regained her composure, pretending she hadn't heard him. "Here's your order. Have a nice day." She spun on her heel, ready to bolt. But before she could take a step, "Wait," she stopped, took a deep breath, turned back. "Yes?" Damien tilted his head slightly, eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Do you always run off this fast?" Sophie crossed her arms. "Depends. Do you always end up at the same cafe as the person who accidentally hugged you?" His smirk returned. "Maybe it's fate," she raised an eyebrow. "Or maybe it's an airport with limited coffee options." "Fair point." Damien picked up his cup, taking a slow sip, without taking his eyes off her. "Since we've run into each other again?" he mused, setting the cup down. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie narrowed her eyes. "If I say no, you're gonna ask anyway, aren't you?" "Definitely," she sighed. "Fine, ask." Damien studied her, his expression unreadable. "Then, did you really mistake me for your brother, or were you just in the mood to hug a random stranger at the airport?" Sophie's jaw dropped. "Excuse me?" He shrugged, feigning innocence. "I mean, you seem pretty comfortable. I might feel special." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Sophie groaned, rolling her eyes as she placed her hands on her hips. "It was an accident. I had no idea who you were." Damien took another sip of his coffee, talks clearly entertained. "That's surprising," she frowned. "Why?" He leaned back in his chair, his voice effortlessly smooth. "Because people usually know." Sophie stared at him, speechless. And somehow she had the distinct feeling that this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. Sophie studied him carefully. There was something about the way he had said it, casual, almost indifferent, but underneath there was a hint of something else. "So, you're saying you're used to being recognized?" she asked, tilting her head. Damien Sinclair let out a quiet chuckle, the sound smooth and effortless. "Something like that. People usually look at me and see my money. It doesn't bother me. It's just part of the deal." Sophie observed him for a moment. He was wealthy, powerful, and exuded the kind of confidence that came with both. But for the first time, she caught something in his tone, something almost tired, as if the weight of his reputation wasn't just an advantage, but a burden. "Well, I'm not people," she finally said. Damien raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching slightly. "That much I've noticed." For a few seconds they just stared at each other, caught in a silence that felt different, charged with something Sophie couldn't quite define. Damien was the first to break it. "So, you work here?" "Yep, and before you ask, no, I'm not undercover, investigating your secret billionaire life." He laughed, shaking his head. "Good to know." Sophie smiled, but before she could say anything else, her manager's voice cut through the moment, calling her name from across the cafe. She sighed, adjusting her apron. "Looks like I need to get back to work." Damien nodded. "It was a pleasure being your customer today. I hope we run into each other again." She hesitated for a second before flashing him a small, genuine smile. At least this time, I won't be hugging the wrong person. Damien smirked. Shame. I was starting to enjoy it. She rolled her eyes, turning away, but as she walked back to the counter, something inside her told her this wouldn't be their last encounter. And she was right. The next few days were a strange mix of routine and anticipation. Since that unexpected run-in with Damien Sinclair, Sophie had tried to push aside the nagging feeling that something in her life was about to change. But apparently, fate had other plans. That morning, like always, she tied her apron, pulled her hair back, and took her place behind the cafe counter. The shift was busy, customers coming and going, voices blending with the whir of the coffee grinder, the air thick with the scent of roasted beans. And then, he appeared. Damien Sinclair walked into the cafe with the kind of presence that commanded attention without even trying. He moved with quiet confidence, his sharp gaze scanning the room before settling directly on her. Sophie felt a shiver crawl up her spine. No. She muttered the word under her breath, willing this not to be real, but it was too late. He lifted a hand, deliberately catching her attention. Waitress. Sophie narrowed her eyes. He did not just do that. For a brief moment, she considered ignoring him, but she was a professional. With a sigh, she grabbed her notepad and made her way over, stopping at his table with polite sarcasm laced in her tone. Mr. Sinclair, what can I get you today? Damien gave her a satisfied smile. A coffee. But I want it made by you. Sophie blinked. What? His smirk didn't waver. I want you to make it personally. She crossed her arms. Are you implying that the coffee here isn't good enough? Not at all. He leaned back in his chair. I just want to see if you're as good at making coffee as you are at giving awkward hugs. Sophie's face heated instantly. You're not going to let that go, are you? Definitely not. She let out a dramatic sigh, scribbled down his order, and marched off to make his coffee, her mind still racing. When she returned, she set the cup down in front of him and folded her arms. Here it is. The best coffee this place has to offer, made by me. Damien picked up the cup, took a slow sip, and then his eyebrows lifted slightly. Wow. Sophie raised an eyebrow. Wow as in good, or wow as in terrible? He set the cup down, amusement flickering in his stormy gray eyes. Wow, as in, I didn't expect it to be this good. Despite herself, Sophie smiled slightly. Of course it's good. I work here, remember? Damien chuckled. Yeah, but I have to admit, I'm surprised. Her brows furrowed. Surprised? He leaned forward, resting an elbow on the table. You have a certain spark in your eyes, a determination that doesn't quite fit a regular job. You seem like you belong somewhere bigger. Sophie blinked, caught completely off guard by his words. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then, finally, well, paying bills takes a lot of determination too. Damien let out a low laugh, shaking his head. Fair point. But before Sophie could respond, her manager called her name again, snapping her back to reality. As she turned to leave, she couldn't help but wonder, what exactly did Damien Sinclair see when he looked at her? And why did it feel like, somehow, he wasn't entirely wrong? Just as Sophie was about to respond, a familiar voice cut through the air. Mr. Sinclair, what an honor to have you here again. Sophie internally groaned as Mr. Phillips, her overly strict and perpetually serious boss, suddenly appeared, his usual frown replaced by a forced, overly enthusiastic smile. I hope you're being well taken care of, Phillips continued, his voice practically dripping with fake politeness. Sophie narrowed her eyes. Oh, now you care about customer service? Damien glanced between her and Phillips before answering, his tone smooth as ever. Actually, I'm being very well taken care of. Sophie is doing a great job. Mr. Phillips' smile froze for a fraction of a second before he turned to Sophie with a sharp look. That's good. Then, without missing a beat, he added, and why are you standing around? Get back to work. Sophie pressed her lips together, swallowing a sigh. Just as she turned to leave, wait, she stopped, glancing back. Damien clasped his fingers together, his gaze now fixed on Phillips. I'd like her to keep serving me. Mr. Phillips hesitated, visibly caught off guard. Ah, of course, but we can't leave other customers waiting. Then have someone else cover for her. The tension in the air thickened. Sophie glanced between the two men, feeling the growing discomfort in her boss's stance. Trying to defuse the situation, she spoke up. Mr. Phillips, I can keep serving tables. It's not a problem. But Damien just smiled, taking another sip of his coffee. Relax, Sophie. I enjoy good conversation. She let out a quiet sigh. What the heck was going on here? Mr. Phillips, clearly out of options, forced another strained smile before walking away. But Sophie could feel it. He was not happy, and she knew exactly what that meant. He already didn't like her, and now, with Damien Sinclair specifically requesting her, things could only get worse. But when she turned back to Damien, she caught the small, knowing smirk playing on his lips. Oh, he's enjoying this, which meant trouble. The tension in the cafe lingered for days. Ever since Damien Sinclair had started showing up regularly, Sophie had noticed the stares, the whispers from her coworkers, the curious and sometimes envious glances. It wasn't just Mr. Phillips who didn't like the attention she was getting. Some coworkers watched with intrigue, others with irritation. And Sophie? She just wanted it to end, because there was one question that kept nagging at her. Why did he keep coming back? Damien Sinclair was a billionaire, a private investor with no time for distractions, yet he kept returning to this small, ordinary cafe, always asking for her specifically. It made no sense. The cafe was bustling when her shift finally neared its end. Sophie was wiping down the counter, mentally counting the minutes until she could leave, when suddenly, that feeling, a chill ran down her spine. She already knew who it was before she even turned around. And sure enough, there he was. Damien Sinclair had just walked in, as if he owned the place. But this time, he didn't go to his usual table. This time, he walked straight up to the counter. Sophie sighed, already bracing herself for whatever teasing remark he had planned. But instead, he said something she didn't expect. I need a favor. She blinked. A favor? From me? He nodded, completely unfazed. Yes, I want you to have dinner with me tonight. Sophie almost dropped the cloth she was holding. What? Damien's lips curled into that signature smirk. Dinner. You know, food, conversation, that sort of thing. Sophie's eyes widened. Why on earth would I have dinner with you? He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping just enough to send a shiver down her spine. Because I want to get to know you better. Her breath caught, and then he smirked even more. And because you want to, too. You just won't admit it. Sophie opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. You are incredibly full of yourself. Damien chuckled, completely unbothered. I've heard that before. And you think I'm just going to say yes? His smile didn't falter. Yes, because I don't take no for an answer. Sophie crossed her arms, ignoring the flutter in her stomach. Well, that's your bad luck then. Damien hummed as if considering her words. Then, without a word, he grabbed a napkin, pulled out a pen, and scribbled something down. He slid the napkin toward her. Here's the address. I'll be waiting at 8 p.m. Sophie picked it up, rolling her eyes. And if I don't show up? Damien tilted his head slightly, his gaze sharp, challenging. Then I'll assume you're afraid of me. Her brow twitched. Afraid? Of you? He smirked. You don't seem like the type to back down from a challenge. And then, without another word, Damien turned and walked out of the cafe. Sophie stared at the napkin in her hand, her heart racing. Great. What was he up to? At 7:59 p.m., she was still trying to decide if she was actually going to go. Sophie stood in front of the restaurant Damien Sinclair had written on the napkin. She had no idea why she was here. This was a terrible idea. And yet, there she was. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The restaurant was elegant but understated, the kind of place that exuded quiet sophistication rather than flashy extravagance. It was intimate, discreet, a place carefully chosen to ensure she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. Her eyes scanned the room, and of course, there he was, seated at a reserved table, looking impeccably put together, as always. The moment their eyes met, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. I didn't think you'd come. Sophie slid into the chair across from him, crossing her arms. I almost didn't. Damien tilted his head slightly. So why did you? She hesitated for a beat, then sighed. Because you provoked me, and I don't back down from a challenge. His quiet chuckle was almost amused. I figured you'd say that. The waiter appeared, placing 2 menus in front of them. Sophie picked hers up and nearly choked on air when she glanced at the prices. Oh great, a single appetizer here probably costs more than my rent. She swallowed, setting the menu down. Yeah, I can't afford this. Damien didn't even glance at the prices. I know. Sophie stared at him. You know? Yes, And I didn't invite you here to make you pay. Her eyes narrowed slightly. If you think I accept expensive dinners as some sort of payment for my attention, you're very mistaken. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. I figured you'd say that too. Sophie exhaled, crossing her arms. Why am I here, Damien? What do you want from me? For the first time, he was silent. Then, after a few seconds, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I want a conversation. A real conversation. No money, no status, just you and me. Sophie's suspicion deepened. That doesn't make sense. You have thousands of people around you. Why care about me? Damien studied her for a moment before answering. Because you're different. Sophie blinked, caught off guard. Different? He nodded. From the moment you ran into me at the airport, I realized something. You didn't care who I was. You treated me like just another stranger. She let out a small scoff. That's because I thought you were my brother. Damien smirked. Exactly. And even after you found out who I was, you didn't change. You didn't try to impress me. You weren't interested in what I could offer. You were just you. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze unreadable. You treat me like an ordinary man, and that's rare in my life. Sophie felt a strange sensation settle in her chest. There was something unsettlingly sincere about the way he said it. She swallowed. So, you want my friendship? His smirk softened into something else, something almost playful. Let's start with that. Sophie sighed, picking up the menu again. Fine, but I'm choosing the food. Fair enough. The dinner was unexpectedly pleasant. Sophie had expected arrogance, a display of wealth, maybe even boredom. But Damien was different from what she had imagined. He listened. He asked questions. He shared childhood stories, talked about his travels, and not once did he speak with a sense of superiority. For the first time, Sophie found herself laughing, genuinely. And when dinner ended, Damien paid the bill without fanfare, and they stepped outside together. The cool night air brushed against her skin, and Sophie instinctively crossed her arms. Damien glanced at her, and then, without a word, he shrugged off his expensive designer jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Sophie froze. What? I don't want you to be cold. She eyed him suspiciously. This isn't some attempt to bribe me, is it? Damien let out a soft chuckle. If I were trying to bribe you, you'd know. She rolled her eyes, but didn't give the jacket back. For a few moments, they just stood there, watching the quiet street. Then, Damien spoke. I enjoyed this. Sophie glanced up at him. This? What? He turned toward her, and for the first time his expression was free of teasing, free of provocation. It was something more serious, more sincere. I enjoyed spending time with you. Sophie felt her heart skip a beat, and that wasn't a good sign, because no matter how much she tried to deny it, she had enjoyed it too. Sophie tried to pretend nothing had changed. She threw herself into her usual routine, acting as if she hadn't spent one of the most strangely pleasant evenings of her life with a billionaire who, for some inexplicable reason, seemed genuinely interested in her. But ignoring Damien Sinclair was becoming impossible, because he kept showing up. Every single day. Same cafe, same table, same coffee. And of course, he always insisted that she be the one to serve him. He was doing it on purpose, and Sophie knew it. That morning, Sophie arrived at work with her mind elsewhere. Her younger brother, Ethan, had been complaining about pain for days, and worry gnawed at her. He had always been healthy, but something felt off this time. She had already decided, the moment her shift ended, she was taking him to the doctor. But for now, she needed to focus. And just like clockwork, Damien was already there. Sophie grabbed his usual order and walked over to his table. You really don't have anywhere else to get coffee? She asked, placing the cup in front of him. Damien lifted it, taking a sip. I have plenty of options. He looked up at her, expression unreadable, but I like it here. I doubt that. And I like your company. Sophie sighed, crossing her arms. You really don't give up, do you? Not at all. She narrowed her eyes. What do you even get out of this? Damien took another sip before answering. I already told you. I like talking to you. It's refreshing. Sophie rolled her eyes. You make it sound like I'm some kind of summer breeze. Damien smirked. Something like that. And despite every instinct telling her not to, Sophie found herself smiling back. Later that evening, Sophie rushed to pick up Ethan and took him straight to the hospital. The doctor ran tests, and when he finally returned with the results, everything changed. Your brother has a kidney condition, the doctor said, scanning the papers in his hands. He'll need ongoing treatment and possibly surgery. Sophie felt the ground disappear beneath her. But he's always been healthy, the doctor sighed. These things happen, but if we start treatment quickly, he has a strong chance of making a full recovery. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. And how much will it cost? The doctor hesitated, never a good sign. When he finally said the number, Sophie felt her stomach drop. She didn't have that kind of money. Not even close. Ethan noticed the panic in her eyes and reached for her hand. Don't worry, Sophie, he said softly. She forced a smile, blinking back the tears threatening to spill. It's going to be okay. But the truth was she had no idea how she was going to pay for it. The next day, exhausted beyond belief, Sophie dragged herself to work. She had barely slept. Every possible solution, every desperate idea had raced through her mind, but none of them added up to enough money. And of course, Damien noticed immediately. What happened? He asked the moment she placed his coffee on the table. Sophie shook her head. Nothing. His sharp gray eyes studied her. Sophie. She hesitated. And then, for the first time, she told him. About Ethan. About the diagnosis. About the treatment she couldn't afford. Damien listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finally finished, he set his cup down and said, I'll pay for it. Sophie froze. What? I'll cover the cost of his treatment. His voice was calm, as if he were offering to buy her another coffee, not save her brother's life. No debt, no favors, just because I can, and because I want to help. Sophie shot up from her seat. No, Damien frowned. Sophie, I don't take money from anyone. I'm not a charity case. He leaned forward slightly. This isn't charity, it's a gesture. And I don't want your gesture. She turned to walk away, but then he caught her wrist. Not tightly, not forcefully, just enough to make her pause. Then his grip loosened and he said, Then let's make a deal. Sophie narrowed her eyes. What kind of deal? Damien sat back, his gaze steady. You cook for me. For a week. Sophie blinked. What? You cook 3 meals a day at my apartment for 7 days. She stared at him, processing. This sounds like a weird deal. He smirked. Think what you want, but that's my offer. Sophie hesitated. She hated accepting help, but she loved her brother more. Sophie swallowed hard, her heart pounding. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, she said the only thing that made sense. Deal. She had no idea what she was getting herself into. At first, Sophie thought Damien Sinclair's offer was simple enough. Cook 3 meals a day for a week? Easy. Wrong. Because the next morning, when she arrived at the address he had given her, she realized her mistake. The building was a sleek glass tower, guarded by security, with an entrance so polished it practically sparkled. The doorman gave her a once-over, the kind of look that said, You don't belong here. But the moment she mentioned Damien's name, she was escorted to a private elevator. As the doors glided open, Sophie stepped into another world. The penthouse was stunning. A space so massive it barely felt real. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a breathtaking skyline, sleek minimalist furniture, soft lighting that gave everything an almost surreal glow. And there, sitting casually on a black leather couch, sipping coffee as if this were the most normal thing in the world, was Damien. He glanced up, his signature smirk already in place. Welcome. Sophie folded her arms. Okay, this is ridiculous. Damien raised an eyebrow. What's ridiculous? She gestured wildly. This whole place, this view, she pointed to the decor. This furniture that looks like it belongs in a museum. Damien chuckled. Did you expect something different? Yes, a normal apartment, not a mansion in the sky. He shrugged. If you prefer, we can eat in the kitchen. Sophie exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. Never mind, where am I supposed to cook? Damien tilted his head toward a nearby door. Over there. Sophie followed his gaze and nearly had a meltdown. The kitchen looked like something straight out of a gourmet cooking show. Everything gleamed, stainless steel, marble countertops, a massive chef's stove. Even the utensils looked like they cost more than her entire monthly salary. She turned back to him, incredulous. Have you ever even used this kitchen? Damien smirked. Of course. I've walked through it a few times. Sophie rolled her eyes. Great. I work in a tiny cafe, and now I have to cook in a 5-star restaurant. Can you handle it? He teased. She jabbed a finger at him. I take on challenges, but if you become a difficult customer, I'm throwing a pan at you. Damien laughed, shaking his head. Fair enough. The first few days were strange. Every morning, Sophie arrived early, prepared breakfast, then ate alone in the kitchen while Damien worked in another room. For lunch and dinner, he never told her what he wanted. "Surprise me," he'd say. And despite herself, she was starting to enjoy the challenge. Slowly, she got used to the silence, the luxurious space, the endless supply of high-end ingredients. But the strangest part? Damien started spending more time in the kitchen. At first, he'd just pass through to grab a coffee. Then, he began sitting at the counter, watching her cook, and eventually, they started talking. One night, as Sophie chopped vegetables, Damien leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Why did you choose to be a waitress?" Sophie scoffed. "I didn't choose it. I needed a job." "And what would have been the right choice?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Something I actually enjoyed, but not everyone has the luxury of choosing." Damien was silent for a moment, then murmured, "What if you did?" Sophie stopped chopping, turning to face him. "Why do you care?" He gave a small, almost wistful smile. "Because I have everything money can buy, but I've never had the freedom to choose something I truly wanted." Sophie hadn't expected that answer. And for the first time, she realized something about Damien Sinclair. Maybe in his own way, he was just as much a prisoner of his own life as she was. On the 5th day, Damien did something unexpected. Sophie was in the kitchen, focused on preparing dinner, when she noticed something resting on the counter. A dress. Elegant. Simple, yet undeniably expensive. She turned, arms crossed. "What's this?" Damien leaned casually against the doorway, his expression unreadable. "It's for you." Sophie stared at the dress. Elegant, timeless, undeniably expensive. "What is this?" she asked, her voice careful. Damien leaned against the counter, watching her with that infuriatingly unreadable expression. "A dress, obviously." She shot him a look. "I can see that. I mean, why?" "I have a charity event tomorrow night," he said simply. "I want you to come with me." Sophie froze. "What?" "It'll be fun." Her jaw nearly dropped. "Have you lost your mind?" Damien's lips twitched into a knowing smirk. "Probably." Sophie picked up the dress, still in disbelief. "I can't go. I don't belong in your world." Damien took a step closer, his gaze steady. "And why not?" She swallowed hard, her stomach twisting. This man, he was dangerous. Not in the traditional sense, but in the way that made her question things she had never questioned before. And in that moment, she realized something unsettling. She wanted to go. But admitting that would mean acknowledging that Damien Sinclair was getting under her skin. And that was a problem. The next evening, Sophie was in Damien's car on the way to the event. The dress fit her perfectly, and when she stepped out of her room, Damien froze. She frowned. "What?" For a second, he just stared. Then, as if snapping out of it, he blinked and straightened his tie. "Nothing." His voice was almost too casual. "You just look beautiful." Sophie's heart raced unexpectedly. She forced a scoff. "You probably say that to everyone." Damien smiled, a slow, almost amused smile. "No." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she did the only thing she could, pretended she hadn't heard. The moment they arrived at the charity gala, Sophie knew she was out of place. The venue was grand, filled with people dripping in designer outfits, their conversations smooth and practiced, and they were all staring at her. Women whispered behind crystal glasses, their gazes subtly judgmental. Men looked at Damien, then at her, then back at Damien, as if trying to figure out why she was here. Sophie squared her shoulders. Let them stare. But then, it got worse, because that's when she saw her. Tall, blonde, every bit as elegant as she was intimidating. And judging by the way she was looking at Damien, it wasn't hard to guess. The ex. Sophie barely had time to react before the woman glided over, her lips curving into a smile that was just a little too sharp. "Damien." Her voice was silky smooth. "What a surprise to see you here." Her gaze flickered to Sophie, eyes scanning her from head to toe, assessing, calculating. And then came the final blow, wrapped in fake politeness. And with such an interesting companion, Sophie felt her blood heat. Before she could even think of a response, Damien moved closer. And then, to her complete shock, he took her hand, fingers intertwining with hers effortlessly. "She's not my companion," he said, voice cool, casual. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "She's my guest." A beat of silence. Then, "And if you have a problem with that, maybe you should find another table." Sophie froze. Because for the first time, Damien Sinclair was standing up for her. And something inside her shifted. She glanced up at him, taking in the firm set of his jaw, the unwavering way he held her hand, and suddenly everything felt different. She was in his world. A world where she had no business being. But for the first time, she allowed herself to admit it. She liked him. Much more than she should. The night blurred after that. Sophie could still feel Damien's fingers laced with hers, the way he had defended her without hesitation, the surprised looks from the guests around them. She didn't know why it affected her so much, but her heart was pounding. Why did Damien care so much about protecting her? They barely knew each other. Or maybe, in some way, he saw her differently. A little while later, Damien leaned down, his voice low. "Come on, let's get something to drink." He let go of her hand, but remained close enough that no one would dare look down on her again. Sophie nodded, trying to ignore the way her pulse raced. She never imagined stepping into Damien's world. And honestly, she wasn't sure she wanted to be here. But then, she looked at him. The way his gray eyes flickered toward her every few seconds, making sure she was okay. And suddenly, she felt something strange, something she didn't want to name. Maybe, just maybe, she wanted to be by his side, even if it was a mistake. The next morning, Sophie woke up to a nightmare. Her name was everywhere. She didn't even have to look it up, because the moment she stepped into the cafe for her shift, she could feel it. The stares, the hushed whispers. Some were filled with surprise, others, envy, judgment. "Sophie, were you at a gala with Damien Sinclair? That dress, where did it come from? Did he buy it for you? Did you see? Isabella posted about you on Instagram." Sophie's stomach dropped. She grabbed her phone, fingers trembling, and against her better judgment, she opened social media. The first thing she saw, a photo of her and Damien together. The second, the comments. "Who is this nobody? Looks like Damien fell into a gold digger's trap. She's probably just another one he'll toss aside in a few days." Sophie's stomach twisted painfully. She didn't want this. She never wanted the attention, the gossip, the judgment. And yet, here she was. Sophie had never wanted to be part of this world, and now she was right in the middle of it. Her eyes burned as she shoved her phone into her bag, trying to block out the whispers and giggles from her coworkers. But her patience was wearing thin. By the time Damien walked into the cafe at the end of the day, Sophie was seething. He moved with his usual confidence, his expression calm and unreadable, completely unfazed by the attention. Of course, he was used to this, used to being judged, watched, talked about. But she wasn't, and right now she felt nothing but anger. The second he reached the counter, Sophie leaned forward and murmured sharply, "We need to talk." Damien raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Here?" "No." For the first time, something in her tone made his amusement fade. His gaze flickered over her serious expression, and after a beat, he nodded. "Let's go somewhere quieter." 10 minutes later, they were in a nearby park. Sophie didn't waste a second. "Do you have any idea what you did?" she demanded. Damien tilted his head slightly. "I defended you." Her jaw clenched. "No, you threw me into your world, and I don't want to be in it, Damien." He was silent for a moment. Then, with a quiet sigh, he asked, "Is that what's really bothering you, or is it what people are saying?" Sophie squeezed her eyes shut, trying to contain the frustration boiling inside her. "I don't want to be a scandal. I don't want to be a headline. I just want my normal life." Damien studied her carefully, and then he said something that took her breath away. "But you never wanted a normal life, Sophie." She froze. "What?" His gaze was steady. "You've always wanted more. You've always had dreams, always wanted something beyond what you were given. But now, just because a few people are criticizing you, you're scared." Sophie felt a lump rise in her throat, because deep down, he was right. And she hated that he could see it so clearly. But before she could process what that meant, Damien made his biggest mistake of the night. He reached out, just slightly, as if to comfort her, and without thinking, Sophie pulled back. It was instinctive, automatic, but it was enough. Damien's expression shifted. For just a fraction of a second, she swore she saw something almost like hurt. The moment stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. Sophie swallowed hard. I need to go." Before he could say anything, she turned and walked away. And for the first time, it felt like something was breaking. The next day, Sophie did everything she could to push Damien from her mind. She threw herself into work, avoiding thoughts of his words, his gaze, the way he had seen her fears so clearly. But forgetting Damien Sinclair was impossible, especially when, that afternoon, she heard a name that made her freeze. The Sinclair Group bought up several businesses a few years ago, including that restaurant downtown that shut down. Sophie's blood ran cold. Slowly, she turned toward the coworker who had spoken. "What did you just say?" The woman blinked at her. "The Sinclair Group. Damien's company. They bought out a bunch of places, forced some into bankruptcy too, including that old restaurant your family used to own. You didn't know?" Sophie couldn't breathe. Her family's restaurant, the place her parents had built from the ground up with everything they had, the place that had been the heart of her childhood, the place that had been ripped away from them. And now, after all these years, she was just finding out that Damien Sinclair's company was the reason why. A wave of rage crashed over her. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She grabbed her things, jumped into a cab, and went straight to his penthouse. When Damien opened the door, he didn't even get the chance to speak before Sophie stormed inside. "It was you," he frowned, confused. "What?" She turned to face him, her hands clenched into fists. "Your company, your empire, it destroyed my family's restaurant." The silence that followed was deafening. Damien didn't deny it, and that was worse than anything else. Sophie felt her chest tighten. "It was just a game to you, wasn't it?" Her voice wavered with something between betrayal and fury. "You knew from the beginning." Damien's expression darkened. "That's not true." His voice was steady, but something flickered in his eyes, something almost urgent. He took a step closer. "Sophie, listen to me." "No." She shook her head, taking a step back. Because suddenly, the man she thought she knew, the one who challenged her, made her laugh, made her feel things she didn't want to admit, was a stranger. Sophie didn't want to admit it. Didn't want to admit that the same man who had made her laugh, made her feel safe, made her feel seen, was also the man who had destroyed a part of her history. And in that moment, something inside her broke. She looked at Damien one last time. Then she walked away. She didn't look back. But deep down she knew this wasn't the end. Sophie descended the stairs of Damien's luxurious penthouse, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her vision blurred as tears burned the back of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was furious, hurt, betrayed. She had trusted him, and he had known all along. Damien had known that his company was responsible for ruining her family's restaurant, and yet he had never said a word. What else was he hiding? The fragile trust that had been growing between them shattered. She hailed a cab and went straight home. When she stepped into the small apartment she shared with Ethan, she found him sprawled on the couch, flipping through TV channels. The second he saw her face, his brow furrowed. "You okay?" Sophie forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But Ethan wasn't convinced. "Are you sure? You never come home looking this upset." She took a deep breath, pushed her emotions aside. "I'm fine, Ollie. Want to have dinner?" He nodded, but his eyes lingered on her, filled with quiet suspicion. Sophie didn't want him to know. The last thing he needed was to worry about the mess her life had become. The following days were strange. Damien disappeared. He didn't show up at the cafe. He didn't text. Nothing. And Sophie tried to convince herself that this was a good thing, that she needed the distance. But every time she walked into the cafe and saw the empty table where he used to sit, an uncomfortable pang settled in her chest. She shouldn't care. He had lied to her. He had deceived her. So why did she miss him so much? She threw herself into work, trying to drown out the thoughts. But deep down, she knew something inside her was broken. And the worst part? She had no idea how to fix it. A week later, Sophie was closing the cafe when she heard footsteps. The bell above the door chimed. Without looking up, she sighed. "We're closed." A beat of silence. Then, "I know, but I needed to talk to you." Sophie's heart stopped. She knew that voice. Slowly, she turned, and there he was, Damien Sinclair. He looked different, tired, the usual confident glint in his storm-gray eyes gone. There was a weight in his expression, something broken. Sophie didn't want to hear anything he had to say, but at the same time, she wanted to hear everything. He took a slow step forward. "Please, just listen to me." Sophie folded her arms. "Say what, Damien?" Her voice was cold. "That you knew from the start that you got close to me out of guilt?" Damien closed his eyes for a brief second, exhaling deeply. Then he shook his head. It wasn't like that. Her throat tightened. Then explain. Damien took a breath, his voice quiet but firm. I didn't know about your family's restaurant until a few days ago. I don't handle all the company acquisitions, Sophie, and when I found out, believe me, I was just as shocked as you were. Sophie wanted to believe him, but it was hard. Very hard. Why should I trust you? She whispered. For a moment, Damien hesitated. Then he said the only thing he could. Because I never lied about how I feel about you. Sophie's breath caught. That was the one thing she didn't want to hear. The one thing she desperately wanted to be true. Damien took a step closer. His voice was raw. I never wanted you to hate me, Sophie, but if that's the price of telling you the truth, I'll accept it. She didn't know what to say. Before she could find the words, he reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. He placed it on the counter. Sophie frowned. What is this? Damien didn't answer. He just looked at her one last time, and then he turned and walked away. Sophie stared at the envelope, her fingers trembling as she reached for it. When she opened it, her breath left her body. Inside was a contract, and with it, the deed to her family's restaurant. Her hands shook. Damien had bought it back and put it in her name. Her legs almost gave out. The restaurant, her family's restaurant. It was hers again. Damien had given it back, without asking for anything in return. And in that moment, Sophie realized the truth. He was trying to fix the past. Sophie couldn't sleep that night. She spent hours staring at the contract, her mind tangled in emotions she couldn't unravel. Anger, confusion, gratitude, and something else. Something she wasn't ready to name. But for the first time, she knew exactly what she needed to do. The next morning, Sophie showed up at Damien's penthouse. When he opened the door, his expression shifted from surprise to something unreadable. Before he could speak, she stepped inside. And then, before she could stop herself, before she could even think, she hugged him. Damien froze. For a second, he didn't move. Then, slowly, carefully, he hugged her back. Sophie closed her eyes, breathing him in, the familiar, subtle scent of cedarwood and something distinctly him. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Thank you, she whispered. Damien's arms tightened around her. I just wanted you to have what was always yours. She pulled back slightly, her gaze searching his. Does this change things? For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, finally, he said the only thing that mattered. It only changes if you want it to. Sophie's heart raced, because in that moment, she knew the answer. And when Damien leaned in, slowly, carefully, their lips almost touching, she didn't pull away. Because for the first time, she wanted this. She wanted him. And there was nothing left to deny it. Sophie never imagined her life could change so drastically in such a short time. For years, she had been fighting to survive, juggling jobs, paying bills, carrying the responsibility of taking care of Ethan. She never had time for dreams, never let herself believe she could have more than what she had. But now, holding the contract in her hands, she felt something different, something new. She was facing a choice. She could accept what Damien had done, take back her family's restaurant, and move forward, leaving him behind. Or she could face what she was truly feeling, because no matter how much she tried to push him away, the truth was undeniable. Damien Sinclair affected her in a way no one else ever had. He challenged her, frustrated her, but he also made her laugh. He wasn't perfect, but he was someone who, despite everything, seemed willing to change for her. And that scared her more than anything. She needed time. She needed to think. So she did what she always did when the world felt too big, too uncertain. She went home, hugged Ethan, and pretended her life wasn't completely upside down. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't willing to give her that time. Because that night, a phone call changed everything. The phone rang late. Too late. Sophie's stomach dropped when she saw the caller ID. The hospital. She answered, her pulse hammering in her ears. The doctor's voice was calm, but beneath it was something else. Urgency. Miss Carter, you need to come immediately. Her blood ran cold. What happened? A pause. Then, it's Ethan. His condition has worsened. He needs emergency surgery. Sophie felt her legs weaken. No, no, no. She grabbed her bag and ran out the door, barely aware that her hands were shaking. Fear consumed her. The hospital was a blur, hallways rushing past her, lights too bright, voices too distant, until she saw the doctor. "What happened?" she demanded, breathless. His expression was grave. "His kidneys are failing. We need to operate immediately." But he hesitated. "The procedure is expensive. Even with insurance, there are additional costs. And I have to be honest, time is critical." Sophie's world spun. Money. It always came back to money. Her heart pounded. She had some savings, but not enough. Not nearly enough. Her knees nearly gave out. She couldn't lose him. Ethan was her family. The one thing that truly mattered. But she was out of options. And then one name came to mind. The one person who never took no for an answer. With shaking hands, Sophie grabbed her phone. She hesitated for only a second. Then, without thinking, without second-guessing, she dialed Damien Sinclair. Damien answered on the second ring. "Sophie?" His voice was urgent, filled with concern. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her breath was shaky, panic tightening around her chest like a vice. And then, finally, "It's Ethan. He needs surgery. I don't have enough money." A beat of silence. Then Damien said the only thing that mattered. "I'm on my way." She couldn't explain what she felt in that moment. But when he arrived at the hospital, coat thrown over his always impeccable shirt, storm gray eyes filled with unwavering determination, Sophie knew she wasn't alone. Damien didn't hesitate. He spoke with the doctors, signed the papers, made sure Ethan got the best care possible. Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need his money, that she didn't want to owe him anything. But right now, the only thing that mattered was Ethan's life. The surgery took hours. Sophie sat in the waiting room, legs restless, heart pounding, mind racing, and through it all, Damien stayed by her side. He didn't try to fill the silence. Didn't try to tell her everything would be okay. He was just there. And when she needed it, he held her hand. And somehow, that was enough. When the doctor finally appeared, his words shattered the tension like glass breaking. The surgery was a success. Sophie felt the world tilt. Her body sagged in relief. The tears came before she could stop them. And then, for the first time, she hugged Damien without hesitation. It was different from the hug at the airport. Not a mistake, not desperation. It was gratitude. It was something growing inside her that she couldn't ignore anymore. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Damien wrapped his arms around her, holding her tighter. Always. She didn't know what that moment meant. But she did know one thing. Nothing would ever be the same. In the days that followed, Ethan's recovery was slow but steady. Sophie spent every minute by his side, making sure he was okay. And Damien? He never left. He helped with everything. Coordinated with the doctors, handled the bills, made sure she didn't have to worry about anything but Ethan. And the strangest part? He never once brought up the money. Never once acted like he was owed something. And that confused her even more. Because for the first time, Sophie realized Damien Sinclair wasn't the man she thought he was. Maybe he never had been. That evening, while Ethan was asleep, Sophie stepped outside to get some air. She sank onto a bench in the hospital garden, pulling her knees to her chest. The sky was clear, the stars stretched endlessly overhead. She heard footsteps, and she knew before she even looked up who it was. Damien sat down beside her, silent at first. Then quietly, "You look tired." She let out a short, breathy laugh. "I'm exhausted." A pause. "But Ethan's getting better, and that's what matters." Damien nodded. Then, "And you? How are you?" Sophie turned to look at him. Under the soft glow of the hospital lights, he looked different. Not the untouchable billionaire, not the man the world whispered about. Just Damien, the man who had been there when she needed him most. And in that moment, she realized she wasn't fighting it anymore. There were no more walls between them. She didn't know when it had happened, but Damien Sinclair had become someone essential in her life. She wanted him. So, for the first time, she didn't run. Sophie leaned in slightly, her heart hammering. She watched him, waiting, giving him a chance to pull away. But he didn't. He just waited, as if he had known this moment would come. And then, she closed her eyes and kissed him. At first it was soft, hesitant. Then, Damien responded. His hands came up, cradling her face, pulling her closer. And suddenly, everything made sense. It was warmth. It was safety. It was something Sophie hadn't known she needed, until now. When they finally pulled apart, Damien rested his forehead against hers, breathing deeply. Then in a voice low and teasing, he murmured, "Does this mean you're going to stop running?" Sophie smiled. "I think so." Damien's fingers brushed gently against her face. his touch careful, as if she might disappear. And in his eyes, Sophie saw something she had never seen before, something that made her certain she was exactly where she was meant to be. That night, for the first time, Sophie finally accepted the truth. She was in love with Damien Sinclair, and this time, there was nothing left to deny it. She didn't know how long she stayed there, feeling his breath so close, the ghost of his kiss still lingering on her lips. Her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of everything settling into her bones. A part of her wanted to freeze this moment in time, to figure out how she had gotten here. How the man she once saw as nothing more than an arrogant billionaire had become someone she couldn't imagine her life without. But at the same time, she didn't want to think. For the first time, she didn't want to run. Damien reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his gray eyes watching her closely. Not just seeing her, but truly seeing her. His voice was quiet. "Will you regret this tomorrow?" Sophie felt a small smile pull at the corner of her lips. "I think I'm past the point of regrets." Damien's lips quirked up, but his expression still held something serious. "So does this mean you'll give me a chance?" She exhaled, looking away for a second. A part of her wanted to give in completely, but another part still carried scars. "I don't know how to do this, Damien. I never have." His hands found hers, steady, warm, patient. "Then we'll figure it out together." Sophie looked up at him, and in that moment, she knew she had never wanted to try something as much as she wanted to try with him. The days that followed were different. After that night at the hospital, nothing was the same. Damien stayed, not just for Ethan's recovery, but for her. And Sophie knew it. Their conversations became lighter, their glances more intense, their goodbyes a little longer each time. Until finally, Ethan was discharged. That day was filled with relief and joy, but it also marked the moment Sophie had been dreading. The restaurant was officially hers now. It was time to decide what to do with it. And, of course, Damien was by her side. The first time Sophie stepped back inside the building, a familiar scent surrounded her. Old wood, faded memories. She walked through the empty space, running her fingers over the dust-covered tables still draped in cloth. Every corner of this place held a piece of her childhood. A time when life had been simpler. A time when her family had still been whole. Damien didn't say a word. He simply watched her, giving her the silence she needed. Finally, Sophie turned to him, her heart steady, and for the first time, she allowed herself to admit it. "I want to reopen this place." Damien nodded, as if he had already known her answer before she even said it. "Then let's make it happen." Sophie blinked, a little surprised. "We?" He shrugged, arms crossing over his chest. "I know a little about business. Maybe I can help." Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Are you trying to be my business partner, Sinclair?" Damien chuckled, stepping closer. "Maybe I just want a reason to stick around." Sophie's heart raced, and before she could stop herself, the words came out. "You don't need a reason." The moment she saw the look in his eyes, she knew. There was no turning back. Damien reached for her waist, pulling her closer. "Then I guess I'm finally where I'm supposed to be." And this time, Sophie let herself believe it. The restaurant would reopen. Her brother was safe, and for the first time, Sophie allowed herself to be happy without fear. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done with her yet. Because the next night, Damien took her to dinner. He had said he wanted to celebrate. But Sophie could tell something was different. He seemed nervous. And Damien Sinclair was never nervous. The restaurant wasn't fancy, no etiquette, no extravagant displays of wealth. It was just them. And somehow Sophie had a feeling tonight was going to change everything. The restaurant was warm and intimate, its soft lighting casting a golden glow over the table. It was perfect. Just them. In the middle of dinner, Damien reached into his pocket. Sophie's breath hitched as he placed a small box on the table. Her heart stopped. "Damien." He took a slow, steady breath, then opened the box. Inside, a simple but elegant ring shimmered under the dim light. Sophie felt her world tilt. Damien met her gaze, his voice low and unwavering. "I've never been the kind of man who follows rules. I've never been good at showing what I feel. But you—" He exhaled as if steadying himself. "You changed everything. And I don't want to imagine my life without you anymore." Tears burned behind Sophie's eyes. "Are you asking me to marry me?" he finished, his fingers closing around hers. "Not because it's the right time, not because it makes sense, but because I know it's you, and I know I want you forever." Her heart pounded so hard it ached. For years, Damien Sinclair had challenged her, frustrated her, made her question everything she thought she knew. But in this moment, he wasn't asking her to fight. He was only asking her to accept happiness. Sophie smiled through her tears, and with a certainty she had never felt before, she whispered, "Yes." The word left her lips without hesitation, without fear. Damien let out a soft laugh, sliding the ring onto her finger. Then, he pulled her into a kiss, one filled with promises. The restaurant would reopen. They were together. And finally, their fate was sealed. The next morning, Sophie still couldn't believe what had happened the night before. Damien Sinclair, the man who had completely unraveled her life and her heart, had proposed, and she had said yes. No hesitation, no fear, just the absolute certainty that this was what she wanted. For so many years, she had run from love, doubted people's intentions, held back, afraid of getting hurt. But now, she had found someone worth the risk. But saying yes to Damien Sinclair wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The morning was chaos. Sophie's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. First, Ethan freaked out. His protectiveness kicked into high gear, and convincing him that this wasn't some huge mistake took more effort than she expected. Then, the restaurant took center stage. With renovations in full swing, Sophie threw herself into every detail, making sure everything was perfect for the grand reopening. And Damien, true to his word, was right by her side. What surprised her most was his level of involvement. For a man who had always been surrounded by luxury, Damien adapted to this world far too easily. He helped choose furniture, attended meetings with suppliers, and, to her utter amusement, even put on an apron to help test recipes in the kitchen. Sophie nearly doubled over laughing the first time she saw Damien Sinclair covered in flour, scowling at a bowl of dough. "Cooking is harder than it looks," he grumbled. She grinned. "Oh, I know." But what impressed her the most? His patience. He didn't try to take over, didn't try to control her decisions. He was just there, a true partner. And that terrified her. Because for the first time in her life, Sophie wasn't doing this alone. But, as expected, not everything was smooth sailing. The news of their engagement hit the media like an explosion. Within hours, headlines flooded the internet. Who was Sophie Carter? What did Damien Sinclair see in her? How long would this last? And of course, Isabella didn't waste any time. His ex-girlfriend gave thinly veiled interviews, dropping just enough hints to paint Sophie as the villain. She's taking advantage of him. Damien is blinded by passion. It's just a matter of time before he realizes this is all a mistake. Sophie tried to ignore it, but it wasn't easy. Damien knew something was wrong the moment he found her sitting alone at the restaurant late at night. She was staring at her phone, her expression exhausted. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. She hesitated. "Then I'm trying to be." Without a word, Damien sat beside her. And then, he took the phone from her hands. He glanced at the headlines, at the shallow articles, the speculation, the words meant to tear her down. But his face remained calm, unbothered. Sophie exhaled shakily. "All of this," she sighed. "It feels like I've lost control of my own life." Sophie let out a shaky breath. "I used to be just an ordinary girl trying to get by. Now I'm Damien Sinclair's fiancée, and to the world, that seems to mean I'm not myself anymore." Damien stayed silent for a moment, studying her. Then, quietly, he said, "You're still the same person you've always been. These people, they don't know you. They only see what they want to see." She turned to him, uncertain. "And what do you see?" A slow, lopsided smile pulled at his lips. "I see the girl who hugged the wrong man at the airport and completely turned my life upside down." His grip on her hand tightened slightly, "And I've never been more grateful for a mistake." Despite everything, Sophie laughed, and for the first time in days, the tension inside her eased. "Me too." Damien lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a slow, lingering kiss to her fingers. "Let me handle this." She frowned. "Damien, I don't need you to solve my problems." He nodded. "I know, but sometimes letting someone help doesn't mean you're weak. It means you trust them." Sophie exhaled, feeling something inside her shift. He was right. She had spent so much time protecting herself, so much time standing alone, that she had forgotten. Accepting help could also be a sign of strength. The next day, Damien did exactly what he promised. He gave an exclusive interview, a direct, no-nonsense statement that shut down the rumors instantly. He talked about how he and Sophie met, about the restaurant, and how their relationship had nothing to do with money or status. But the real turning point? When he looked directly into the camera and said, "Sophie Carter is the love of my life, and nothing, not money, not headlines, not speculation, will ever change that." It was impossible for the tabloids to twist the narrative after that. But the final blow came when Isabella made her last attempt. She showed up at a high-profile event, expecting to draw Damien's attention, expecting that she still had some control over him. But Damien? He walked right past her. Not a glance, not a word. And in that moment, for the first time, Isabella realized she no longer had a place in his life. And for the first time, Sophie felt that chapter of their story finally close. A week later, the restaurant was ready. The grand reopening was more than just an event. It was a homecoming. Ethan stood beside her, helping coordinate everything. And Damien? He stood nearby, watching her with unwavering pride. When the doors opened, when the first customer stepped inside, Sophie felt tears well up in her eyes. She had done it. The restaurant was alive again. And more than that, she was happy. That night, after the long hours of celebration, Damien took her to the balcony of the restaurant. The city lights glowed in the distance, casting golden reflections against the glass. He turned to her, his expression soft. "I told you it would be a good investment." Sophie smiled. "You mean the restaurant?" She teased. "Or me?" Damien chuckled, shaking his head. "Both." Sophie laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I never imagined my life would lead me here." Damien cupped her face, his thumbs grazing her skin, his voice lowered. "Now that you're here, what do you want?" She didn't hesitate, didn't doubt. "I want you." Damien smiled, then kissed her. And at that moment, Sophie knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Time seemed to fly after that. The restaurant was running just as she had always dreamed. Ethan was healthy and happy. And Damien? He was still there, like the missing piece she never knew she needed. But now, with the wedding approaching, Sophie often found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. How had one simple mistake at the airport completely changed her life? Wedding preparations began almost immediately, and Sophie quickly realized planning a ceremony was no simple task. While Damien remained infuriatingly relaxed about everything, making it very clear he would do whatever she wanted, Sophie found herself drowning in decisions, invitations, dresses, catering, decorations. It was a whirlwind of choices she never thought she'd have to make. She let out a dramatic sigh, sinking into Damien's couch, surrounded by a ridiculous pile of wedding magazines. "I never thought planning a wedding would be this hard." Damien, sitting beside her, picked up one of the magazines and flipped through it with mild amusement. "Then," he smirked, "we could always just elope." Sophie shot him a glare. "Not helping, Sinclair." He just laughed, pulling her into his arms, completely unfazed. And despite everything, Sophie found herself laughing, too, because no matter how overwhelming the next few months might be, she had him. And that made all the difference. Damien flipped through one of the wedding magazines with mild amusement. "You know, we could just elope and get married in secret, right?" Sophie shot him a playful look. "Do you really think Ethan would ever forgive me for that?" Damien grimaced. "Fair point." Then, softer, "But if it's getting too stressful, let me help." She sighed, reaching for his hand. "You already help. Just by being here." Damien squeezed her fingers gently. "I just want this day to be perfect for you." Sophie smiled, her heart swelling. With Damien by her side, no matter what happened, it would already be perfect. The news of their wedding spread like wildfire. Every newspaper wanted details, every gossip site wanted to speculate about the ceremony, and of course, every critic wanted to compare her to Isabella. Sophie tried to ignore it, but it was hard seeing her name in headlines questioning her intentions. Through it all, Damien never wavered. He cupped her face gently, his stormy gray eyes steady. "The only opinion that matters is ours. Nothing else makes a difference." And he was right. The morning of the wedding, Sophie stared at her reflection in the mirror, feeling her heart race. Her dress was simple yet elegant, exactly as she had envisioned it. The soft fabric draped effortlessly, hugging her figure, while a few loose strands of hair framed her face. Then, Ethan walked into the room. He stopped mid-step, his eyes widening. "Wow." Sophie smiled, blinking back tears. Thank you, Ollie. He stepped closer, taking her hands. I've never seen you this happy. She took a deep breath, trying to hold herself together. I am happy, Ethan grinned. Then I guess you're ready to marry that arrogant billionaire. Sophie laughed. Definitely. The ceremony was held in a beautiful outdoor garden, surrounded by soft glowing lights and an ocean of delicate white flowers. Everything felt dreamlike. As Sophie walked down the aisle, she could feel the weight of every guest's eyes on her. But she only saw one person, Damien, standing at the altar, waiting for her. His perfectly tailored suit, his slow, breath-stealing smile, his eyes burning with something that made her heart race. When she finally reached him, Damien took her hands and whispered, "You look breathtaking." Sophie smiled, her heart pounding. The officiant began to speak, but she could barely focus. All that mattered was the man standing in front of her, the man who had changed her life in ways she had never imagined. Sophie, do you take Damien as your husband, to love and honor him for all the days of your life? She looked into his eyes and felt an overwhelming certainty. Yes. The officiant turned to Damien. Damien, do you take Sophie as your wife, to love and honor her for all the days of your life? Damien's smile grew wider. Yes, forever. The moment their lips met, the moment they sealed their vows with a kiss, the sound of cheering and applause erupted around them. But all Sophie felt was him, his hands warm and steady, gently cradling her face, his touch, his presence, home. The reception was filled with laughter and joy. Ethan gave a heartfelt speech, teasing Sophie but ultimately admitting that he had never seen her so happy. And Damien, always playful, smirked as he raised his glass. I never wanted a younger brother. But I suppose I can make an exception for Ethan. The crowd laughed. Sophie rolled her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she felt completely, utterly at peace. They danced the night away. They laughed, toasted, and celebrated the beginning of their new life together. And when the night finally wound down, when they were alone at last, Damien pulled her into his arms. You're officially my wife now. Sophie smiled, resting her head against his chest. And you're officially my husband. Damien leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a slow, tender kiss. Thank you for changing my life. Sophie looked at him lovingly, running her fingers through his hair. You changed mine too. And they both knew, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Forever.